This evening's talk is titled, you said get permission? Get permission. Get permission. So when the idea here, and there's several different directions we can take this, the idea here is that you could, whoever you're working with in whatever dynamic it may be, get permission. And when I say get permission, I'm saying have it be a cooperative kind of situation rather than you're doing what's good for someone else based on your own presumptions, preconceptions, and so on. So even though you see very clearly what someone is doing, or that they're not living their life in a way that is skillful or sane, for that matter, don't interfere with someone based on your presumptions, your preconceptions, even though they seem very accurate, because it's not so much a matter of accuracy of your judgment of them. It is rather a matter of relating to things as they are and how they may be with any given situation or person, whether it might be your mate, might be your student, might be your teacher. Get permission. In other words, make sure that there's some kind of opening there where the energy that you bring towards that situation with the most lofty of ideals, if the person is not ready to really receive that in the way in which it is intended or meant, then you may be doing more to harm that person. You may be doing more to cause them to shut down or to turn away from you, or to the very advice, suggestion, instruction, description you may have. So another way of looking at this is, this does not necessarily just mean saying, can I help you? Can I do this or that? Do I have permission to tell you how this whole situation looks to me? Not so much that kind of thing, but actually get permission by way of seeing so clearly, because you've been looking at your own mind and you see the way you are wired, that the person is not, you can see that they're not really, even though they might be saying, oh yeah, help me. Yeah, sure. I mean, what do you think I should do? How do you think I should? Be very careful about stepping into that territory, and regardless of your intention. Quite often, people who misunderstand themselves and others in such a way that they're not even aware that their intention is to appear like a helpful person to themselves and even to others, rather than to actually fundamentally help someone. I'm sure we all have seen a little bit of that go on. Someone who is trying to look like a helpful person and may put a tremendous amount of energy into that and still not be particularly successful at accomplishing what they've set out to do, which is to look helpful, to seem helpful, to convince others that they're helpful. Excuse me. So you could say that if you're very clear on what's happening with your own body, speech, mind, your own dynamic, your own motivations, your own aspiration, inspirations, and so on around this path as a practitioner of Buddhism or a student of Buddhism or as a meditator, comes back to the advice I often give to people is don't do anything else you have to. Don't step into anyone else's territory unless you see very clearly that this is something. And I'm not saying you need to be a fortune teller. Say, well, look at it and say, well, I know this will help them because of this and this, and this will help. And this. I'm just saying you may not know, but if it looks like what you're seeing is an opening, or there's some kind of receptivity on the part of the person that you're interacting with, regardless of their rank, their relationship to you, quite often the best help you can give to anyone, the most generous thing you can ever do for anyone, is give them your attention. Pay attention to them. Listen. Look at what's happening to them. Look at their body language. I don't mean the language that this means that and this means that. I'm not talking about that, the modern idea of studying body language like they had on, what was that TV program?
Lie to Me.
Yeah, Lie to Me. Good program. It's just that it was a pack of lies. So quite often generosity is seen as giving, and of course giving your attention is a kind of generosity, but also receiving someone's neurosis, receiving someone's confusion without throwing it back at them. Actually receive that confusion from them. And the Buddhist tradition is sometimes called Maitri Bhavana, sometimes called Tonglen, if you do this as an activity of sitting down, following the breath, using the breath as a device for getting the attitude to change from taking in on negativity on the in-breath, sending it out in the out-breath. I don't particularly recommend that style of sending and receiving for Maitri Bhavana. I don't think it's wrong. You should do it if you feel like, if you've been taught that by your teacher, go ahead and do it. So by giving someone your attention, actually looking at them, watching what they're doing, watching their body language, listening to the tone of their voice, listening to their story, listening to their complaints, giving them your attention. Then, because you're doing this, because you're there, because you don't have a big agenda about trying to be a helpful person, that you have an agenda about being with all things. Be with all things. It's sometimes called saving all beings. That may or may not work for you, that particular way of saying it. I say, be with all things, starting with your own thought patterns. Stop fighting with yourself, stop objecting to yourself, and what arises in your mind. And one of the ways that you can do that is to see the degree to which you do it. If you see how much you do it, it will start to slow down. If you don't push it away, if you don't accept it, don't reject it, don't look away, it will start to lose its momentum. So if you're giving someone your attention and they're telling you, or you're aware of what's happening with them, you're listening to what's happening, then you may ask questions, not being particularly nosy, but you may say, well, how is that? What is happening in that area? How are you feeling? Does this feeling persist? And if you're talking to someone who is a meditator, you have a different set of words, language that you could possibly use there to work with a particular person. If they're not a meditator and don't have any way of training their mind and are just kind of at the mercy of their preconceptions, beliefs, opinions, judgments, evaluations, then you'd have to work with them where they're at. So you'd have to see what they're operating with, and then you may see where you don't have permission really to step into that territory. There's such a wall of concepts and ideas, not only about their own mind and what's happening in the world, but what's happening with you, who you are. You may be sitting in front of someone that actually can't even see who they're talking to. They're talking to their idea of you. And it can become very clear to you if you are not wound up in some kind of agenda about being a really good person. But you,
Do you need permission to ask questions?
you might, I mean, but that would be more ordinary kind of permission. I mean, if they're talking to you and you're sitting in a coffee shop and they're kind of an acquaintance or a friend, you would kind of know what your dynamic was already. So some people you might have to say, so could I ask you more about what you're saying there? And they might say, well, sure. You know, like, you don't even have to ask me, just whatever you want to know. Sometimes when someone says that, they really do not mean that, literally. Well, sure, go right ahead. Say, ask whatever you want. So quite often you'll see that a person who is giving you verbal permission to help them is actually very, very shut down. This doesn't mean you can't help them, but it just might take longer. You might have to work with that person where they're at. Meet them where they're at. Meet them where they're at. And you can't, if you haven't met yourself where you're at, or at least in the process of meeting yourself where you're at, which is what this cushion facing the wall is about, sit down, hold still, don't add. Sit down, hold still, don't subtract. Sit down, hold still. Just observe, don't shut down on anything. That's where you learn how to meet, by meeting your own mind where it is at, which may not be real comfortable. You may have to do that for years. Buddha Dharma, awakened truth. Buddha Dharma, without credentials. No merit badges. There's no success story here for anyone. That's about the mundane path, mundane world. This doesn't mean that by doing a lot of meditation, a lot of awareness practice, that you won't start to calm down and feel better and feel less warlike, less likely to go to war with yourself. But it doesn't necessarily mean, there's no guarantee you're going to feel really comfortable. There's no guarantee that you're going to feel like you are a success story around meditation practice. It might be just the opposite. It might be somewhere in between. So at the same time you would get permission to ask questions, just in the interaction, if you've looked at your own mind, you've been working with your own mind, you've been understanding over time how you avoid and how you grasp and how you reject. Grasping, rejecting, shutting down. You're watching and seeing. Maybe you haven't conquered that yet. When I say conquered, I don't mean a war. I mean seeing it so clearly, like we were talking about earlier in the Hojo, about you don't need control to do this. You just need to see what it is. And you won't see what it is if there's one shred of preconception in front of that, because it will look like a cartoon. You won't see that is a burning building. Don't go in there. But if you see that it's a burning building, you're not going to go in it. You don't need self-control to stay out of a burning building. But there are people who are so dismayed by their own passion, aggression, ignorance, that they find other ways of covering up, of dealing, as sometimes in the modern idioms called self-medicating. They find ways to stop the difficulty by, putting something on top of it, cocaine, weed, alcohol. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do that. I'm not sitting in judgment on anyone, but sometimes when this person goes overboard using that, it means they don't really want to be here totally. Because when they don't do that, it's too painful. Since you...
Is it possible to meet someone where they're at without meeting them where we think they're at?
Yes.
How?
Well, it's complicated. you gotta know where you're at, you at least have to be working on that. And then beyond that, it's the particular dynamic between you and the other person. As you know, everybody you meet, you have a different kind of chemistry with. Some people, the chemistry flows so well that it just seems to work. Just to be with them seems to work. You're meeting them where they're just by sitting there looking at them, just listening, just all your senses are on receive, and that's what they need. No, a lot of times people don't have anybody to really listen to them. People are full of advice based on presumptions, and if you're sitting there and you're a counselor, so you know what I'm talking about. You do this every day. So do you feel like you're being helpful or not? Yes or no?
Sometimes.
Sometimes. I didn't give you that option. I said yes or no. Yes or no?
Yes and no.
Answer my question, yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, good, sure, I would agree with that. Of course you are. It's just that, I mean, you're there, you're present, they come and sit down and you look at them and you talk to them, and I know you well enough to know that you don't interfere with their karma. Doesn't mean you don't suffer with them and don't feel distraught because you see how much difficulty they're having and you would like to be able to help, but you also know better than to interfere with somebody else's energy field without their permission. So, yes.
How does permission show up in someone?
First, you have to give yourself permission. So if you haven't actually made friends with yourself, which means giving yourself permission to be a crazy person, what's the smile for? You think that's funny? You think that's serious? Let's see what else I can take from that. So making friends with yourself, in other words, you're with yourself and you don't object to yourself. So if you're objecting to yourself and you're struggling with yourself, when you meet other people who are at war with themselves or having difficulty, then it's very hard to see whether you have permission or not. It's very hard to see what's even going on. And quite often with some people we feel totally freaked out because we know they're suffering, we know they're having a hard time, we feel like, I'm not going to throw up our hands particularly, but we just don't know, we're perplexed by it. And so if you're perplexed about this, to any degree, I'm not saying you have to be a fully enlightened sage to be able to help people, but you have to at least be working with your mind in a way that allows you to see deeply into what the difficulties are. You have to actually experience your mind as it is. My teacher, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, used to say in 2 words, 2 of the most important words he ever said: be genuine. Don't try to be somebody else. Don't try to be a person who is above all this, a person who is enlightened. Be genuine. If you're actually genuine, then the prajna, which is your birthright, starts to just function on its own without a self. But if you're objecting to yourself, agreeing with a self, or shutting down on a self, then that area that is being affected starts to function like a stage play, and we start to go into some kind of acting as if we're enlightened, acting as if we're crazy, acting as if. More?
What is craziness?
It's a word that is sort of put on to things that don't make any sense and don't seem to be very safe. They seem to be somewhat dangerous from the point of view of predictability. So there are people who are crazy from the relative point of view. We agree on that. Basically, people agree on that. On the other hand, there's a kind of craziness that gets nurtured. That is, if it's cultural craziness, then it's okay. It's okay to get completely loaded on the weekend, watch football, and that's That's just something you could do. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but just saying that a lot of that it gets pretty crazy sometimes. Watching a soccer match, sometimes the craziness that happens there. And if you're talking about crazy wisdom that's referred to in Buddhism, it is someone who is functioning out of no separation, who sees actually what needs to be done and what needs to be done based on awareness, rather than on some kind of opinion or idea of self-centeredness or some idea of right and wrong. That person, he or she, may function in such a way that looks crazy to others, and so they may be accused of being crazy when they're not. They're just functioning out of basic goodness, or tathagata garba, or some other fancy word we could come up with. More. You're next. Didn't you have your hand up a few minutes ago?
How do we give ourselves permission to be crazy?
Just by sitting, in our tradition, we sit down and we look at our craziness and we notice the way we don't want it to be that way, and we just watch it, and we watch where it gets its energy from, and it gets its energy from fear. We're afraid of being who we are. We're just afraid of being genuine. We already are not separate from the Buddha, from the awakened one. It's just that it's many, many centuries of civilizations and so on, and karma, cause and effect, fighting. Who knows? Goes back to beginningless time, how this all started. More?
This might be the same question as what Shoka asked, but how do we see if someone is giving us permission?
So I can say it a little bit different, a little different way, but basically if there's warfare going on here, it's going to be hard to do that without it being some kind of a artificial thing that we kind of concoct. But if you're basically not at war here, then you can see what's happening in front of you with any person who's talking to you, and you'll see whether they're, you could say, open. They might not say, yes, give me permission, but you can see the way in which a person is open and the way in which they're shut down. And just because a person tells you over and over again, yes, you're, like people sometimes do to me, yes, you're my teacher, tell me, please help me. Some people don't even say that, and yet I have their permission. Other people are trying to convince me that they. And again, it's not right or wrong. I'm not here to blame or condemn anybody. I'm willing to work with anybody wherever they're at, whatever level of studentship, whatever you call that one is. I'm happy to work with them there. Yes, more.
Is seeing where somebody is open the same as permission to go into that opening?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. If you don't have to do it, don't do it. You might see where they open up, but it might be, it could close back down. It could be, it's hard to say what it is. You shouldn't do anything unless you have to do it. And you'll know. You say it this way, your karma and their karma and the combination of causes and conditions that are, it's called tributary streams flow through the darkness. We can't know about that. All we know is what's in the light. But if you understand what that is, then you really realize what as Dogen said, and I have to paraphrase, when you're completely full of understanding about this, then there's a whole big area that's totally in the dark. And if you think everything is in the light, then this is delusion. It's a difficult area to talk about because we're talking about relative truth, absolute truth, and what we have is the relative language, which we kind of coax into talking about something that's ineffable, that's difficult to talk about. So you might be very excuse me, helpful, it might be very helpful for you to sit, as we've talked earlier, just recently, sit in front of someone and just be with them. And don't necessarily do anything with it. You might ask them, like Chazan was asking, you might say, could I ask you about a little bit more about that? And then they would say, yeah, or they might not. They might say, no, that's private, that's all I'm gonna tell you. And they might ask, well, you know, if it was like a relationship or a job, or there's something to do with one of their parents, or some kind of confusion going on. You know, just being with the person and listening to them is so really valuable, because it's so rare for someone to listen and not give advice. Very, very rare. Because we always have some kind of idea about what they should do. Have you noticed that? We all know what everybody else should do. And I'm one of them. You know, I think you all should meditate. A lot, as much as you can. Further questions? Any questions out there?
We're having difficulty with the broadcast.
Oh, is it going in and out?
Yeah. I don't know if it's the weather.
You know, this particular new program, is that what's difficult?
I don't know.
Google? Don't know. So we can discuss this some more. Yokodo.
So when you say, see how you object to yourself, is just noticing not liking a feeling an objection?
Oh, don't do anything more with it than that. When your negative feeling comes up, if you just notice that you don't particularly care for it, that's totally valid. Nothing to be corrected there. But when we add something else onto it, like the reason I'm feeling this way is because of this, or if I hadn't have done this, or there I go again, and all those little snippets of concepts, a little commentary. As soon as you have any commentary, even the slightest, even a sigh, you might as well be doing this. It gives you relief in terms of in terms of strengthening the self who is sighing. And there's no guarantee that if you stop doing that and you just look and you're just willing to be with, when I say willing to be with, it's not even a statement of willing to be with. It's just you notice you're not objecting to anything. You get no credentials and go. It becomes, you could say, depersonalized. There's room for really good questions here. I'm ready to, as soon as I have permission from you, I'm ready to let you have it. The technology is working. Train your mind. Regardless if you're a student of mine, train your mind. Please sit down, hold still, watch what moves. And in this way, slowly, over time, over maybe a lot of time, notice what is important and notice what is just fluff. Further questions? Yes?
Earlier you made reference to a stage play.
Yeah.
Can you say more about that?
So I don't remember the context exactly, but our life is like a play that's going on, and we get engrossed in it. So we actually think that things that are happening to us have some kind of import and are really important, and we should do this, we shouldn't do that. But if we begin to live out of awareness rather than out of the content of what's happening, whether we're winning or losing, or whether we're young or old, or whether we're smart or dull, but just whatever is happening, we're just with that. Somehow, by doing that, you're able. The image that I like to use is it's like you just something, or either you or something that is very comfortable with you, moves the awareness off the stage. You're in a witnessing mode. There's not much that someone watching a play can do to affect the play. That's a metaphor for wisdom. Sir.
What do you mean something that is comfortable with you?
Well, it's if your ego structure is it's there, and you're no longer objecting. You're no longer trying to polish your ego to make it a worthwhile, respectable ego that has a right to go into enlightenment with your awareness. It's like your Buddha nature is realize it doesn't really have an unruly child anymore to deal with. It's still there, but it's unreal, so it's no longer has a big agenda about anything. So the Buddha nature, the awakened nature, the deeper self, the Tathagata, is no longer having difficulty with that part of you. Discontinuous identity is seen through as being what? Discontinuous. Lots of parts that make up what? A whole. It's a whole situation. And not separate.
Does comfortable always mean that it feels good?
No, maybe not a very accurate image. But it's like that. It's like we can work with this now. It's like it's workable. May not be comfortable. But there's lots of images about awakening and enlightenment, and and even Trungpa Rinpoche's images. He's wrote hundreds of books and spent his whole life talking and teaching the Dharma. And some of his images are a little bit, I'd say misleading in a way, because we tend to latch onto them and say, well, he said this, that must mean this or this or this. Like saying the Bodhisattva just sails right through situations. Well, I think there's something to that. The Bodhisattva does sail through situations, but it doesn't mean there isn't bad weather or difficult. Basically what is being conveyed there, my understanding is you can't derail the Bodhisattva. He or she, once the Bodhisattva understands what this is about, and this is why they have the bhumis, the first bhumi of joy, and on up to the cloud of Dharma, or beyond. There's, in the Tibetan tradition, I think there's one bhumi past that, the 11th. But all these stages are kind of defining what the state of mind is of the particular Bodhisattva. Yes.
Can you watch something so much that you begin to remove yourself from it?
What, for instance?
You're watching a situation and you almost disengage, that you're so much about watching it.
Yeah, I think you could. I don't know if that would translate as objectivity necessarily. It might translate as subjectivity.
That's what I'm thinking. It seems like that's the other extreme to completely buying into everything. That sometimes I notice myself backing out to a point of ignorance, or not necessarily ignorance as in not looking, but not acknowledging that I'm part of that dependently arisen situation.
So it's not just sounds like awareness to me. Awareness just sees what's moving and doesn't necessarily join or reject anything. It's not that concepts or ideas around it might not arise. And, as like a template, you would put on something. Say, well, is that ignorance? See, well, maybe. Is that passion? I don't know. That kind of fits. So you may be reflecting on those three poisons, trying to get an understanding of what's happening. Yes.
When you're watching your thoughts about a situation, for me at least, it's easy to say, to almost dismiss it as not real, or that's not really what's happening. Is there a way to not even do that with the thought?
So when you, I was listening to what you said, and when you said, oh, that's too far. As soon as you add anything to it, it seals you away from that in terms of separation, in terms of this and that, success and failure, aware, not aware. So to respond to your question, I would say yes, if you remember what you asked me. Good one, yes. Got a few minutes left if there's any, yes.
Can asking questions ever take you out of your awareness of a situation?
You mean asking questions of a person? Yes, oh, very, very much. Awareness isn't something you maintain necessarily. So yes, it could take you in and out, but the awareness still sees that you go in and out. The awareness is completely free to be anywhere. It can be in the middle of confusion. It can be, it's like the Bodhisattva, Kashiti-garbha goes into hell. I mean, that's got to be a really distracting place for Kashiti-garbha to be. I mean, with all those terrible things happening in hell. So it could do that, but this is why in our lineage, the Mahayana Buddhism, the vow is so important. You observe a vow to be with all things, and you set about trying to do that and trying to understand what that means. Anyone else? Anything else? Yes, Bailey.
You were talking about when things get depersonalized, it's like nothing special. Can nothing special and special arise simultaneously?
Yeah. It's not two. So the whole not two, non-duality, Advaita, all of that is we witness that more and more, good and bad, happy and sad. All thoughts vanish into emptiness like the imprint of a bird in the sky, which is a line from the sadhana of Mahamudra, the Trungpa Rinpoche. So it's like good and bad, happy and sad, valid, not valid. Those things start to show up, and those are freaky for ego. The ego doesn't like that. Let's just slow down here and let's find out what's really right. What's right? What's the truth here? So we try to. Ego wants to squeeze relative truth to get a drop of the absolute from it. So it will work on it. And there are people who are extremely good at working in this area that will sell you, will make a living doing this. Not wrong. Go ahead. But yes, it's Sandokai. It's not two. Equality of sameness and difference. It's very much different. And yet it's the same. And we start to bring our awareness to that. It's this astonishing situation, and it is awareness. It's awareness, and it's in time and space, and it's not in time and space. It's alive, and it's not alive. It's sacred and it's profane. You can't name any two things that you can name. It's both and neither.